Abduction. Consciousness slammed back into Zeke Henderson like a freight train. Gasping, heart pounding, he bolted upright, and immediately cracked his forehead on a low-hanging bulkhead. Son of a... The exclamation died on his lips as his surroundings came into focus. This was definitely not his bedroom. Hell, it didn't even look like Earth. Sleek metallic walls curved in strange, organic patterns, lit by pulsing strips of bioluminescent something. Zeke's last clear memory was jogging through the park near his house, earbuds in, lost in the rhythm of his feet against the pavement. There'd been a flash of purple light, a sensation of falling, and then, nothing. Until now. He stared at his hands, half expecting to see some kind of alien mutation. But no, they were the same calloused palms and blunt fingers he remembered, still bearing the faint scars of a lifetime of hard living. Zeke hadn't always been a jogger. In fact, for most of his adult life, a leisurely stroll to the fridge counted as vigorous exercise. But when you've stared death in the face as often as he had, you start reevaluating your priorities. As a former Spec Ops commando, he'd tangled with some of the worst humanity had to offer. Drug lords. Terrorists. Rogue states with more firepower than sense. He'd lost good friends, seen things that would give any sane person a lifetime of nightmares. And through it all, he'd relied on his training, his wits, and not a small amount of luck to keep him breathing. Apparently his luck had finally run out. Because unless Nike had opened an outlet store in the Twilight Zone, he'd just been abducted by aliens. Again. You'd think one extraterrestrial kidnapping would be enough for a lifetime. But no, apparently the universe had a sick sense of humor when it came to Zeke Henderson. The first time had been back in Afghanistan, a midnight raid gone foobar in the worst way. He still had nightmares about those spindly gray things, the way their soulless black eyes seemed to bore into your very being. His team had fought, of course. Fought hard, fought smart. Didn't matter. In the end, he'd found himself strapped to an examination table, strange machines whirring and clicking above him, probing and prodding in. No. He shook his head, banishing the memory. Not helpful. That was then, this was now. And right now, he had to focus on getting out of, wherever the hell this was. Zeke swung his legs over the side of the cot he'd been lying on, bare feet slapping against the strangely warm metal floor. He was still wearing his jogging clothes, a faded old army t-shirt and shorts. No shoes, though. Damn aliens couldn't even abduct a man with his dignity intact. The room, if you could call it that, was Spartan in the extreme. The cot, a small basin of what he hoped was water, and a few unidentifiable pieces of technology embedded in the walls. No obvious door, which was concerning. He'd just started examining the walls for any sign of a seam or control panel when a bone-deep hum filled the air. Zeke spun around, instinctively dropping into a combat stance, as a previously invisible seam split the far wall in two. Two figures stepped through, and Zeke felt his jaw drop. He'd been expecting more of those spindly gray bastards, or maybe some Hollywood-style little green men. What he got was something straight out of a fever dream. The one in the lead stood at least 7 feet tall, a mass of rippling muscles under iridescent scales. It had 4 arms, each ending in a 4-fingered hand tipped with wicked-looking claws. Its elongated head sat atop a thick, sinuous neck, a lipless mouth filled with needle-like teeth. The other hung back, smaller and slighter. It wore some kind of form-fitting bodysuit, deep purple and shot through with glowing circuitry. Its skin was pale blue, almost translucent, stretched over a frame that looked too delicate to be real. But its eyes, Zeke felt a chill run down his spine. Those eyes held an intelligence that was vast, ancient, and utterly alien. Human, the big one rumbled, its voice like granite slabs grinding together. You will come with us. Zeke bit back the first dozen responses that sprang to mind, most of which would have gotten him court-martialed back in the day. Instead, he straightened up, squaring his shoulders. And if I respectfully decline? The alien's mouth stretched in what might have been a smile, if smiles typically involved way too many teeth. That was not a request. In one fluid motion, almost too fast to follow, it reached back and unclipped something from its belt. A weapon, Zeke realized, as it leveled a sleek, ominous-looking device at his chest. Well, shit. So much for diplomacy. Time seemed to slow as Zeke's combat instincts kicked in, adrenaline flooding his system. He'd been in enough tight spots to know that the next few seconds would likely determine whether he lived or died. His eyes darted around the room, assessing, calculating. No cover to speak of, nothing he could use as a makeshift weapon. Just him, two very unfriendly aliens, and a whole lot of uncertainty. He really wished he had a gun right about now. Or a grenade. Hell, he'd settle for. Wait. There, on the smaller one's belt. A hilt like the one the big guy was pointing at him. If he could just get to it. Zeke took a deep breath, marshalling every ounce of speed and strength in his body. Then, with a guttural yell, he charged straight at the hulking alien. It blinked, momentarily taken aback by this display of suicidal bravery. That split second of hesitation was all Zeke needed. He juked to the side at the last instant, the alien's weapon discharging with a sizzling hiss as a bolt of energy scorched the air where he'd been a heartbeat before. Zeke dove into a forward roll, coming up in a sprint as he barreled toward the smaller alien. It let out a high-pitched trill of alarm, fumbling for its own weapon. Too slow. With a leaping tackle that would have made his old football coach proud, Zeke slammed into the spindly creature, sending them both tumbling to the floor in a tangle of limbs. His hand closed around the weapon hilt, wrenching it free just as a set of surprisingly strong fingers clamped around his throat. Zeke twisted, bringing his elbow down hard on the alien's wrist joint. It let out a satisfying crunch, the fingers spasming open. He rolled away, coming up in a crouch with the weapon pointed squarely at the big one's chest. "All right, boys," he panted, adrenaline still singing in his veins. "Let's try this again. Take me to your leader, or whatever the hell you do with uninvited guests." The hulking alien stared at him for a long moment, then let out a rumbling sound that might have been laughter. Impressive, for a primitive. Perhaps you will provide more entertainment than anticipated. Zeke's finger tightened on the weapon's trigger. Glad I can amuse. Now, about those answers. But the alien just shook its head. All in good time, human. For now, know that you have been chosen for a great honor. You will fight for the glory of the Imperium, in the hallowed arena of Zath. Should you prove worthy, you may even win your freedom. Zeke digested that for a moment. Arena? Imperium? What the hell had he gotten himself into this time? And if I don't feel particularly honored, he asked, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew the answer. The alien's teeth glinted in the pulsing light. Then you will die, and another will take your place. The arena always demands fresh blood. Fan-freaking-tastic. Abducted by aliens, pressed into some kind of gladiatorial deathmatch, all on an empty stomach. Just another Tuesday for Zeke Henderson. He blew out a long breath, running a hand through his sweat-damp hair. Well, when you put it like that, how can I refuse? Let on, Rocky. The alien cocked its head. I am K.H. war captain of the... Yeah, big shot, I got it. Zeke waved the weapon. Less talking, more walking. I got an arena to conquer. K.H.'s eyes narrowed, but it turned on its heel and strode out of the room, clearly expecting Zeke to follow. The smaller one scurried after it, cradling its injured wrist and shooting Zeke venomous looks. Zeke took one last glance around the holding cell, committing every detail to memory. Then, with a fatalistic shrug, he stepped through the doorway and into the unknown. As he followed his captors down the winding, otherworldly corridors of the alien ship, one thought kept echoing in Zeke's mind. When I get home, I'm never jogging again. The arena. The roar of the crowd hit Zeke like a physical force as he stepped out into the arena. Thousands of alien faces jeered and howled from the stands, a seething mass of tentacles, claws, and toothy maws. The air was thick with the stench of blood and alien pheromones. Zeke stood in a small antechamber at one end of the arena, separated from the main pit by a shimmering force field. Beyond it, he could see the other contestants emerging from their own holding pens. Some looked almost human, but for the odd extra limb or chitinous exoskeleton. Others were wholly alien, pulsing masses of flesh or writhing tentacles. All of them looked lethal. "Quite the freak show," Zeke muttered, eyeing a particularly nasty specimen with scythe-like claws. "Behold," a voice boomed from somewhere above, resonating through the arena. "The brave warriors who will battle for your amusement. Only one will leave this arena alive. Place your wagers now." A great holographic display flickered to life above the arena, alien glyphs scrolling by too fast for Zeke to follow. It didn't take a genius to figure out it was listing the combatants and the odds on their survival. He wondered what his own chances looked like. His musings were interrupted as K'Ark stepped up beside him, now sporting an elaborate headdress and some wicked-looking armor. "Nervous, human?" Zeke shot him a cocky grin. "Nah. Just thinking about what I'm gonna do with all the prize money after I win this thing." K'Ark chuckled, a sound like boulders grinding together. "Arrogant to the last. I may grow to like you, creature." "Ah, shucks. And here I was thinking this was just a flyby probing." Before the alien could retort, a chime sounded through the arena. The force field shimmered and vanished. "The games begin," the announcer bellowed. "May the mightiest claim the ultimate prize." "That's my cue," Zeke said, cracking his knuckles. "Wish me luck, K'Arky boy." He strode out into the arena, trying to project a confidence he didn't quite feel. The sand beneath his bare feet was hot and gritty, already stained with dark splotches that could only be blood. The other contestants were spreading out, some charging headlong towards the center of the arena where a pile of weapons lay waiting. Others prowled the edges, eyeing their competition warily. Zeke hesitated, taking stock of his options. He was fit and fast, but some of these things looked like they could bench press a Buick. He needed to play this smart. His eyes fell on a wicked-looking blade, half buried in the sand a few yards away. It was closer to him than the main weapon cache, and so far none of the other fighters seemed to have noticed it. Perfect. He sprinted for the weapon, sand flying beneath his feet. He'd nearly reached it when a shadow fell across him. Zeke dove into a roll, snatching up the blade just as a massive fist cratered the sand where he'd been a heartbeat before. He came up in a crouch, blade held before him in a guard position. His attacker was a hulking brute, all bulging muscles and glinting fangs. It let out a guttural roar and charged, meaty fists swinging. Zeke danced back, ducking and weaving as those ham-sized fists whistled past his head. The brute was strong, but slow. Zeke could use that. He feinted left, then spun right as the creature overcommit to the punch. His blade flashed out, slicing cleanly through the tough hide of the brute's arm. Purplish blood sprayed, and the creature howled in pain and rage. Zeke pressed his advantage, darting in close and hammering the pommel of his blade into the brute's snout. Bone crunched, and the creature staggered back, clutching at its ruined face. Zeke raised his blade for the killing blow, and hesitated. This thing, monstrous as it was, wasn't his enemy. Not really. Unlikely allies. Zeke stood over the fallen body of his latest opponent, chest heaving, blood dripping from his blade. Around him, the arena was a charnel house of broken bodies and spilled viscera. He'd lost count of how many he'd killed. They all blurred together after a while, a ceaseless parade of tooth and claw and alien fury. Some had been skilled, forcing him to the limits of his strength and cunning to overcome them. Others fell quickly, their ferocity no match for his hard-won experience. All died, in the end. All except Zeke. A chime sounded, and the force field shimmered back into place around the arena. "Behold," the announcer's voice boomed. "The victor of the bout, the indomitable human. Place your wagers for the next round." Zeke sank to his knees in the blood-soaked sand, suddenly bone-weary. How long had he been fighting? Hours? Days? Time lost all meaning in this place, with no sun or moon to mark its passage. Just an endless cycle of violence and death. He sensed a presence behind him and tensed, ready to leap back into the fray. But it was only K'Hark, flanked by a pair of guards. The alien warlord looked down at Zeke, something like respect glinting in his dark eyes. "Well fought, human," he rumbled. "You exceed expectations." Zeke pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the scream of protest from his battered muscles. "Glad I could put on a good show," he rasped, his throat raw from exertion. "Wouldn't want to disappoint my adoring fans." K'Hark chuckled. "Your spirit remains unbroken. Good. You will need it for what comes next." One of the guards stepped forward, proffering a flask of some clear liquid. Zeke eyed it warily. "If that's your idea of a post-fight cocktail, I think I'll pass." "Drink," K'Hark commanded. "It will restore your strength. You have earned a brief respite, but only brief. The games continue." Zeke hesitated a moment longer, then shrugged and accepted the flask. If they wanted him dead, there were easier ways than poison. He took a long pull, bracing for the burn of alcohol, and blinked in surprise as a cool, faintly sweet liquid slid down his throat. Instantly, he felt a surge of energy suffuse his limbs, washing away his aches and fatigue like a healing tide. "Ha," he said, handing the flask back. "Not bad. I could get used to," he broke off, noticing for the first time the other fighters being led out of their holding pens. The ones who had survived the latest bout, at least. There were fewer than before, Zeke noted grimly. Maybe a dozen in all, each looking as battered and weary as he felt. Felt, past tense, thanks to that magic alien Gatorade. But what caught his eye wasn't their wounds or their weariness. It was the looks in their eyes as they stared at him across the sand. Not anger, not resentment, but something almost like awe. "You fought well, human." The words were thick and guttural, emerging from a lipless mouth set in a face that looked like a cross between a shark and a boulder. "I am Grak." "Well met." Zeke blinked. Thanks." He glanced at K'Hark, who looked amused. "I thought we were all supposed to be, trying to kill each other." The alien warlord shrugged his massive shoulders. "In the arena, yes. But there is honor in facing a worthy foe. And you, human, have proven your worth many times over." Zeke looked back at the other fighters, seeing nods and grunts of agreement. He felt a sudden lump in his throat. How long had it been since someone had looked at him with something other than fear or disgust? He was a soldier, a killer, his hands stained with the blood of countless lives. But here, in this otherworldly hell, he was respected. Admired, even. It was a heady feeling. A dangerous feeling. He shook it off, straightened his spine. "Yeah, well, don't go getting all sentimental on me now," he said gruffly. "Next time we meet, I'll be planting my boot in your ass." Grak let out a bark of laughter. "I look forward to it, human. May the best warrior win." The guards began herding the fighters back to their cells, but not before each gave Zeke a nod or salute of respect. He returned them solemnly, feeling the weight of their regard like a physical thing. As the last of them disappeared from view, K'Hark turned to Zeke with a speculative look. "You begin to understand, I think," he said. "The games are more than mindless bloodsport. They are a crucible, a forge in which true warriors are tempered and shaped." Zeke snorted. "Spare me the pseudo-philosophy. You're not warriors, you're slavers. Using living, thinking beings as pawns for your amusement." Khark's eyes flashed with anger, but his voice remained level. We all have our part to play, human. I serve the Imperium, as my father did, and his father before him. It is an honor to provide such sport for our people. An honor, huh? Zeke shook his head. Funny, I don't feel particularly honored. Just tired, and sore, and royally pissed off. The alien's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. Good. Hold on to that anger. Nurture it, feed it. It will serve you well in the battles to come. With that, he turned and strode away, leaving Zeke alone in the empty arena. The human stared after him, jaw clenched, mind whirling with half-formed plans and nebulous ideas. There had to be a way out of this. A way to turn the aliens' own games against them. But he couldn't do it alone. He thought of Grak and the others, the respect and camaraderie he'd seen in their eyes. Warriors, one and all, dragged from 100 different worlds to fight and die for the Imperium's pleasure. But what if they fought for something else? Something greater than blood and glory? What if they fought for freedom? It was a crazy idea, a desperate one. But Zeke had built his career on crazy and desperate. He had allies now, or something close enough to it. He had his wits, his will, and a burning desire to see these alien bastards brought low. It would have to be enough. With a grim smile, Zeke began to plan. The uprising begins. Zeke crouched in the shadows of his cell, eyes closed, breathing slow and even. To an outside observer, he might have looked like he was meditating, or perhaps catching a few precious moments of rest before the next bout. But inside, his mind was a whirlwind of activity. He was reviewing every scrap of information he'd gathered about his captors, every overheard conversation and stray remark, fitting them together like pieces of a puzzle. The Imperium, he'd learned, was vast, spanning hundreds of worlds across the galaxy. But for all its power and advanced technology, it was not invulnerable. Like any empire, it had its weaknesses, its cracks and fissures waiting to be exploited. Chief among these was its reliance on the games. More than mere entertainment, they were a safety valve, a way to keep the teeming masses docile and distracted while the elite reaped the spoils of conquest. As long as the arenas ran red with blood, as long as new champions rose and fell, the people remained content. But what if that changed? What if, instead of battling each other, the gladiators turned their fury against their masters? It was a dangerous thought, treasonous even. But Zeke had never been one to shy away from danger. His musings were interrupted by a soft tapping at his cell door. He cracked one eye open, hand drifting instinctively to the makeshift shiv he'd fashioned from a broken piece of his cot. But as the door swung open, he relaxed. It was Grak, flanked by two other fighters Zeke recognized from the arena. One was a lithe, insectoid creature with razor-tipped claws, the other a hulking mass of muscle and scales. Both wore expressions of grim determination. "It is time, human," Grak rumbled, his voice low. "We have spread the word among the other fighters. They are ready." Zeke stood, feeling a surge of adrenaline course through his veins. "Good. You remember the plan?" The insectoid clicked its mandibles. "We remember. When the signal comes, we strike as one." "And the guards?" Zeke asked, already moving towards the door. "Dealt with." The scaled behemoth cracked his knuckles. "They will not stand in our way." Zeke nodded, a fierce grin splitting his face. "Then let's do this. Time to show these imperial bastards what happens when you push people too far." They moved swiftly through the warren of cells and corridors, Grak leading the way. Other fighters fell into step with them as they passed, a tide of battered bodies and unbroken spirits. Some bore wounds from their time in the arena, others were marked by old scars, mementos of battles fought on 100 different worlds. But all burned with the same fire, the same hunger for freedom. No guards appeared to challenge them. True to Grak's word, they lay in crumpled heaps where they had fallen, necks snapped or throats slit. Zeke felt a grim satisfaction at the sight. They emerged into the arena to find it in chaos. The force field was down, the stands empty. In the center of the blood-soaked sand, a knot of gladiators battled a contingent of Imperial guards, the clash of weapons and the cries of the wounded echoing off the high walls. And above it all, standing on a raised dais, was K'Ark. The alien warlord's eyes widened as he saw Zeke and the others emerge, understanding dawning on his face. "You," he roared, drawing his blade. "You did this." Zeke spread his hands, the picture of innocence. "Me? I'm just a simple human, remember? Not smart enough to organize a prison break." K'Ark's face contorted with rage. "I should have killed you when I had the chance," he snarled, moving towards the stairs. Zeke held up a hand. "Ah. I wouldn't do that if I were you." The warlord paused, suspicion warring with anger on his craggy features. "And why is that, human?" In answer, Zeke raised his other hand. In it, he held a small, innocuous-looking device, little more than a box with a blinking light. But K'Ark recoiled as if he'd brandished a viper. Where did you get that?" he demanded, his voice suddenly hoarse. Zeke smiled thinly. "You'd be amazed what a man can accomplish with a little determination and a lot of stolen tech. Your boys really should be more careful where they leave their toys lying around." K'Ark's eyes darted from Zeke to the device and back again. "You don't know what you're doing, human. The power contained in that." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing," Zeke interrupted. "See, while you were busy watching us dance for your amusement, my friends and I were doing a little digging. Turns out, this arena of yours is more than just a fancy gladiatorial pit. It's the beating heart of your whole rotten empire." He began to pace, his voice rising to be heard over the din of battle. "All that technology you use to snatch people from their homes, to broadcast the games across the stars, it's all controlled from right here. This place goes down, your whole system collapses." K'Ark had gone very still, his eyes fixed on the device in Zeke's hand. "You would doom us all, then? For what? Petty revenge?" Zeke barked a laugh. "Revenge? This isn't about revenge, K'Ark. It's about justice. It's about giving all those poor bastards you've enslaved a chance to fight back." He raised the device high, his thumb hovering over the activation switch. "It's about freedom." And with that, he pressed the button. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, with a roar that shook the very foundations of the arena, everything changed. The force field generators exploded in a cascade of sparks and flame, the walls of the arena crumbling like sand castles before the tide. The Imperial guards, caught off balance, were swept away by the sudden surge of gladiators, their weapons and armor no match for the sheer, brutal strength of the oppressed. And in the center of it all, standing tall amid the chaos and destruction, was Zeke. He looked at K'Ark, at the fear and incomprehension on the alien's face, and felt a fierce, savage joy. "Looks like the games are over, K'Ark," he said, his voice cold. "Time to pay the piper." The warlord opened his mouth, whether to plead or curse, Zeke never knew. For at that moment, a searing bolt of energy lanced down from the sky, vaporizing K'Ark where he stood. Zeke whirled, eyes widening as he saw a massive ship descending from the clouds, its hull emblazoned with the sigil of the Imperium. Reinforcements, come to crush the uprising before it could spread. But even as despair threatened to engulf him, Zeke heard a new sound rising above the chaos. A sound he had never expected to hear again. Engines. Human engines. He looked up, hardly daring to hope, and let out a whoop of pure, unbridled joy. Descending from the sky like avenging angels were ships, dozens of them, each bearing the markings of the United Earth Defense Force. They opened fire on the Imperial vessel, their weapons tearing through its shields like tissue paper. Zeke felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see Grak, blood-splattered but grinning fiercely. It seems your people received your message, human, the alien rumbled. They have come for you. Zeke shook his head, wonder and pride welling up inside him. No, Grak, he said softly. They've come for all of us. And with that, he raised his fist to the sky and let out a battle cry that echoed across the stars. For Earth. For freedom. And the uprising began in earnest. Freedom's price. The battle raged across the arena, gladiators and Imperials alike falling before the onslaught of Earth's forces. Zeke fought at the forefront, his stolen blade flashing in the artificial light, his battle cries urging his fellow slaves onward. They surged forward, a tide of battered bodies and unbroken spirits, crashing against the Imperium's defenses like waves against a crumbling cliff. For every one that fell, two more seemed to take their place, driven by a lifetime of rage and despair. And yet, for all their courage, for all their newfound hope, it wasn't enough. The Imperials were too many, their weapons too advanced. Slowly, inexorably, the gladiators were driven back, hemmed in on all sides by a wall of armor and energy shields. Zeke found himself back to back with Grak, the two warriors fighting with a desperate savagery born of the knowledge that this was their last stand. Around them, their companions fell one by one, until only a handful remained, a shrinking island in a sea of enemies. It seems this is the end, human, Grak panted, his scaly hide slick with blood, both his own and his foes'. A good death, as deaths go. I am honored to meet it by your side. Zeke gritted his teeth, his arm aching from the weight of his blade. We're not dead yet, Grak. There's always. But his words were cut off by a deafening roar, a sound like the very fabric of space being torn asunder. He looked up, eyes widening in disbelief. The Imperial ship, that vast monstrosity that had hung over the arena like a harbinger of doom, was breaking apart. Explosions blossomed across its hull, great gouts of flame and debris spewing into the void. And in the heart of that destruction, darting and weaving like vengeful ghosts, were the Earth fighters. They had done it. Against all odds, outmatched and outgunned, the humans had struck a mortal blow against the very heart of the Imperium. A ragged cheer went up from the gladiators, a sound of joy and fierce, primal triumph. The Imperials, their resolve shattered by the loss of their flagship, began to break and flee, their perfect lines crumbling into chaos. Zeke whooped and charged, Grak and the others at his heels. They fell upon the enemy like wolves among sheep, their blades and fists and fury carving a bloody path through the once invincible ranks. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The last of the Imperials lay dead or dying, their blood staining the sands of the arena. The gladiators, those who remained, stood panting and bloody but victorious, hardly able to believe that they had won. Zeke stood among them, his chest heaving, his blade dangling from nerveless fingers. He looked around at the faces of his comrades, these beings who had fought and bled and nearly died with him, and felt a swell of emotion rise in his throat. You did it, he said hoarsely, his voice raw from shouting. You're free. Grak laid a massive hand on his shoulder, his toothy grin stained with blood. No, human. We did it. Together. A shadow fell over them, and Zeke looked up to see one of the Earth ships descending, its boarding ramp extending like a hand of welcome. A figure stood silhouetted in the hatchway, tall and proud in the uniform of a UEDF officer. Ezekiel Henderson, the figure called, her voice ringing with authority in something like awe. You're a damn hard man to find. Zeke stared, hardly able to believe his eyes. Captain Sorensen. How, what are you doing here? The captain descended the ramp, coming to stand before him. Up close, Zeke could see the lines of care and worry etched into her face, the gray threaded through her dark hair. But her eyes were as bright and sharp as ever. Rescuing you, obviously, she said dryly. Though from the looks of things, you didn't need much help. Her gaze swept the arena, taking in the carnage, the fallen Imperials, the battered but unbowed gladiators. Quite the party you've thrown here, Henderson. Zeke shrugged, suddenly feeling every ache and pain, every wound and bruise. You know me, Captain. I never could resist a good shindig. Sorensen shook her head, a smile tugging at her lips. I suppose not. But as impressive as all this is, we need to get moving. The Imperium won't take this lying down. They'll be back, and in force. Zeke nodded, his exhaustion suddenly bone deep. Understood, Captain. Just give me a moment. He turned to Grack and the others, seeing his own weariness mirrored in their faces. Hear that, folks? Party's over. Time to clear out before the bouncers show up. Grack nodded, his expression solemn. We will find our own way from here, human. Your people have given us the chance to return to our homes, to find those we left behind. He clasped Zeke's arm, warrior to warrior. We will not forget what you've done here. What you've given us. Zeke returned the clasp, feeling a lump rise in his throat. Don't make me out to be some kind of hero, Grack. I just did what needed doing. We all did. The alien smiled, a fierce, feral thing. Perhaps. But sometimes, that is what heroes do. One by one, the others came forward to bid Zeke farewell. The insectoid, clicking and chirping its thanks. The scaled behemoth, rumbling a promise to name his firstborn after the hairless ape who granted us the sky. Each of them, in their own way, offering gratitude and kinship to the human who had fought beside them, bled with them, led them to freedom. And then they were gone, scattering to the winds to find their way back to the lives that had been stolen from them. Zeke watched them go, feeling a sense of loss mingled with fierce pride. He turned back to Captain Sorensen, who had watched the exchange with a raised eyebrow. Friends of yours? She asked mildly. Zeke nodded, swallowing past the sudden tightness in his throat. The best kind. The kind you bleed with. Sorensen studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded, as if coming to a decision. Come on, Henderson. Let's get you home. Home. The word hit Zeke like a physical blow, a sudden rush of longing and relief and bone-deep weariness. Earth, blue and green and achingly familiar. His apartment, small and cluttered and blessedly his own. The park where he ran, the sound of birdsong in the scent of fresh-cut grass. He took a step, then another, his legs suddenly shaky. Sorensen was there in an instant, slipping an arm around his waist, supporting his weight with effortless strength. Easy there, soldier, she murmured, guiding him towards the waiting ship. I've got you. Zeke leaned on her, too tired to protest, too grateful to care about the indignity of it. He had fought his war, earned his scars. He had stared into the abyss and spat defiance into its gaping maw. And he had won. Not just for himself, but for Grack and all the others, for every soul the Imperium had stolen and subjugated. Freedom. It tasted sweet on his tongue, sweeter than any nectar or ambrosia. It sang in his blood, a hymn of joy and release. But as Zeke ascended the ramp, as the Earth ship sealed behind him and lifted into the sky, he knew that this victory, hard-won and precious as it was only the beginning. The Imperium was still out there, wounded but not broken, its grasp on the galaxy loosened but not destroyed. There would be other battles to fight, other arenas to storm, other chains to break. But for now, in this moment, Zeke was content. He had played his part, struck his blow for justice and liberty. He closed his eyes, letting the hum of the ship's engines lull him towards a dreamless sleep. He was going home. And that was enough.